Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for the Internal Monitoring No App Left Behind webinar, powered by AlertSite. Just wanted to go over quick housekeeping rules with you guys. We will be recording this webinar, so in case you have to drop off early or you want to send it to a colleague, whatever it may be, this session will be recorded. It'll be emailed out once the presentation is posted. We're going to clean it up and make sure we send it out to you guys. And if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the GoToWebinar chat panel. You can tweet at us at AlertSite. I will be monitoring that. And then at the very end, if there are any questions that you feel you want answered or you want to spend some time with our two presenters, feel free to let us know and we can answer some of your questions. So before we begin, I wanted to introduce myself. My name is Mary Catherine Sullivan, and I am the marketing manager for AlertSite. And with me today, I have John and Dennis. Do you guys want to introduce yourselves?
Sure. My name is John Lacania. I'm one of the sales engineers supporting the AlertSite business unit. And I'm with Dennis.
I'm Dennis Goodwin. I'm the product owner for AlertSite.
Awesome. Thank you, guys.
All right, so let's talk a little about SmartBear as a company before we begin. SmartBear has customers all across the world, from Canada all the way out to New Zealand, millions of users spanning different solutions and tool sets, which include functional testing of APIs, REST or SOAP, functional testing of web applications with a tool called Test Complete. As we move into load testing, we have the ability to load test your applications with Load Complete. And last, code collaboration. But that's not why we're here today. We're here to talk about monitoring internal applications, and that's AlertSite. So let's move on. So the agenda. Today we're going to talk about monitoring internal-facing applications. Typically, these applications are monitored with all the tool sets that have been around a long time and may not be monitoring the entire user journey. That includes logging into the application, interacting with it, and eventually logging out. We're also going to talk about how to monitor applications sitting on the cloud. Typically, that's also known as AWS and maybe Azure, APIs, web applications. Looking at the pre-production and testing environment. As you move them from testing to production, monitor them again. They could be internal facing, of course, and that's why we're here. And last, what about monitoring from those branch locations, those large campuses where you have hundreds and thousands of employees? We'll explore all that together, and our host, Dennis, will take us out and tell us more about internal monitoring.
Thanks, John. All right. So what I wanted to start off with is just a visual representation of AlertSite. Typically, most folks who use AlertSite are using it to monitor public-facing web and API applications. So just to kind of level set what AlertSite is, what it does, we've depicted it kind of singularly as a platform on the left side, and we're kind of commingling our SaaS kind of central platform with our monitoring location. So I've just put a handful of the 80+ locations we have on here with the airport codes, just to give a sense of kind of how we're spread out across the globe. And the way AlertSite works is we have locations out there in the wild. They are out there in the same manner that your public users would be as well, and they're able to hit your web and your API applications and exercise multi-step user journeys using Firefox, Chrome, IE, and also with SOAP UI we're able to create sophisticated API monitors that will go through a sequenced set of API calls in the same manner that your web and mobile apps would do so. The AlertSite platform receives the result data and serves that up in dashboards and also generates and distributes reports. The other aspect of the platform that's kind of central to everything we do is the alerting piece. Our alerts fire from the locations where the monitors run. That way they get to you essentially in real time as the failures happen. So that's pretty much the overview of the platform. what happens if I have internal applications that are not available to the open internet? We cannot get to them from the public AlertSite locations. You know, am I out of the water here? Am I unable to monitor using AlertSite? And the obvious answer here, since we booked this webinar, is yes, we can do it. We have what we call the private node server, and what this does is extends the AlertSite platform to your infrastructure. It's a virtual server that can be deployed. It does everything that our public nodes do. We'll talk a little bit more about the specific capabilities in a second, but the bottom line is it's installed in your network. It'll monitor whatever you want it to monitor, whatever you give it access to monitor, and it can be run at pretty much whatever frequencies you want to run inside your network. So it has the ability to run a little hotter than what you might do from the outside. So kind of a little bit about the capabilities of the server. As I said, it's pretty much the same server as we have running on the public locations. It'll do Firefox and Chrome on the website. It'll do Selenium as well. It will run your SOAP UI monitors, so you can have your test cases for your REST and SOAP APIs running on the server as well, and it also will do up-down monitoring and some of the other basic monitors that we have. But the bottom line is it is the full AlertSite capability inside your network. From a deployment perspective, the private node server can be deployed to VMware, it can be deployed to Hyper-V, and it can be deployed as an AMI. So pretty much, the vast majority of folks we've talked to, customers, these three virtual machine hypervisor types cover almost everyone we've talked to over the last year and a half in getting this going.
So Dennis, quick question for you.
Yeah, John.
So what happens if a customer is very excited about deploying one of our hypervisor private nodes, VMware Shop, and they're just considering in the future changing to Hyper-V? What would that mean to them in regard to how they would provision AlertSite, whether it's from a pricing model, license aspect, etc., the work involved?
Right. So the servers themselves, they're virtual machines that get deployed. They're kind of independent, if you will, from the configuration of the AlertSite location. So it is very easy to deploy a server, get the monitors up and running, and then if you decided to switch to a different hypervisor type, or you wanted to spin up a new machine in a new environment with more capabilities, you can simply re-register that server as a on the new virtual machine, and it'll just pick up and keep running on the new one. So there's no real problem with starting with one and then switching. You can also run, you don't have to pick a flavor and stay with it. You can run different virtual machines on different hypervisors, and they're we don't really care. It's still just a location for us, and it's still going to report that information back to the SaaS platform. It's still going to alert. So, good question. But there's no real issue starting with one and switching over, or having a mix of different hypervisors.
That's good to hear.
All right, so let's get back to sort of the point of this, which is your internal applications and how do we monitor them. So as we said, deploying this virtual machine, getting it up and running, allows you to run any of the monitor types we have today. Your applications may be web, they may be APIs. We don't really care. We're going to be able to monitor them regardless. And we'll be able to monitor them in the same fashion that your internal users are going to hit those applications. And these applications could be more employee focused, really more internal. The folks who care about those apps might be more of your internal IT shop folks. So sometimes it's the same groups, sometimes it's not. We got a couple of poll questions we'll try to get some answers on for that. going forward. But that's sort of the high-level view. Now let's talk about what you can do once you deploy one or several of these private net servers. So from an application perspective, one of the really interesting things you can do here is easily monitor multiple versions of an application as it works through the software lifecycle. This allows you to do a few things. It allows you to ensure that performance and functional correctness are what they need to be. Going from version to version, you'll be able to see significant differences from one version to the next because you're able to baseline and then monitor ongoing how those applications are working. Another kind of fringe benefit of this approach is it's also a way to monitor the monitors. And what I mean by that is you'll know before you go to production whether or not your monitoring is going to be functional. And we often see situations where our customers are only monitoring in prod. They'll change their application and then the monitors will break. And then they're scrambling to fix the monitors so that they accurately reflect how the app's doing, and in the meantime they're kind of blind to what's going on with the application once it deploys. So this is a nice way to avoid that problem as well. So that's kind of one flavor of the application perspective of monitoring internally. The kind of flip side of that is providing a focus on your environments. So lots of folks have different setups, multiple tests and QA environments. They're tearing them down, building them back up. It really doesn't matter. The key thing is, based on how your infrastructure is set up, you have the ability to continually monitor certain environments, and that will help you do a couple of things. It's going to help you baseline the performance of that environment. What we see sometimes is, sometimes QA and test environments are not as robust as production, so the performance of those environments may not be as good as prod. Doesn't mean the application coming through the lifecycle is having a problem. It just means you'll know to expect it to perform a certain way in a certain environment. And then when it deviates, when an application version deviates within that environment, then it's more of an application problem, not an environment problem. So that's a big help in not only determining is this environment up, is it working, but how does it typically work, and then how is my application working within that? So it gives you a lot of perspective on what to expect as that app moves towards production. Another benefit of having synthetic monitoring hitting these environments is that they're oftentimes not used consistently. They'll be used in spurts, and by having some constant traffic on the environment, it tends to keep the applications primed and warmed up and ready to go when you are testing, rather than having to sometimes deal with a bunch of failures in the beginning because certain app servers are kind of just firing up and getting caches going. So that's another aspect of it. Yes, John?
For the testing environment, it creates a unique situation far different than monitoring production. Given you pointed out earlier, people are going to tear things up. They're going to tear up and down the various builds.
Yep.
So is there an order way of making the monitors turn on and off in groups of, say, 50 or 100, rather than relying on someone going into the console and manually selecting them?
Well, I mean, there are ways to do that through our APIs, but depending on whether the environment's really coming down or not fully, or if you may want to do something with maintenance windows. There's a lot of ways you might tackle that, depending on the exact environment and the nature of it. So it's hard to answer that question. Turning the monitors off is a way to go, but another way to go might be to simply fire off a blackout window until it comes back up.
Sure.
So I don't know that I have a singular answer for that one, but we have a lot of dials that can be turned to give the best info for that. I know in our case, our environments tend to be up all the time now, and so having continual monitor on them is completely viable. It makes sense. But again, in a more disposable environment setting, there might be some alternate ways that you might want to configure the monitors to address that. But the key thing is that if you're following an app version, that's kind of one flavor of it. If you're following, if you're targeting an environment that you want to have an ongoing view into, I think that's sort of, a different flavor of it.
Absolutely.
Okay, so that's sort of the application perspective on what internal monitoring can kind of do for you. Let's kind of shift gears a little bit here and talk about some of the use cases around various location-centric monitoring and what that can do for you. So we kind of continue to have our depiction of the application here, and now we've introduced the singular corporate headquarters, corporate campus, if you will. So if we start to look at things from the location, the point of presence of the monitoring server, and the application becomes a little more generic, we can see a few different benefits depending on what your infrastructure looks like. The obvious one is really when you've got multiple locations. And this could be virtual locations, they could be physical locations, they could be data centers, they could be corporate offices, they could be remote offices, they could be vendor sites, and they could be even customer sites if you've got customers who kind of have a direct pipe in for some applications. So we see all of those different flavors in the usage of these of the internal monitoring today. There's no one way anybody does it, but the beauty of this is that you can get the private nodes into the locations you need them to figure out, is my application working? How is one location compared to another from a standpoint of performance and reliability? Are there any differences? Ideally, there would be very few differences, but you may have 3 or 4 or 10, retail locations you want to assess performance from. You have the ability to deploy across a larger number of locations as well. The other thing that the ability to target different locations can do is give you an opportunity to monitor the things that might be unique to that location. So again, this is going to vary completely on how you're set up and what you're trying to monitor and what access a certain location has to the different applications. But the point being, you have the flexibility to monitor from wherever you can deploy one of these servers, and they all feed in to the core AlertSite console. They're all treated just like locations would be on the public side, and you can you can combine the results and look at it, and it's going to give you a lot of insight into how those locations are performing. And then kind of finally, to bring it back to a more unconstrained situation, another use case, another thing that folks will do is they will monitor something that's public facing, and they'll do it from both our public locations and from internal locations. And what this does is allow you to determine the relative health and performance of the location as compared to the public at large. So this will let you know if you have a problem with a particular office location or data center getting out to the public internet. So we will see folks who compare internal and external performance in this way. And this public-facing app, it could be your own app, it could be a vendor, a SaaS app, something that you use internally from a corporate perspective. It could also be direct hits on third parties and things that you want to keep tabs on how they're working from both inside and outside. So again, there's a lot of possibilities when you see these kind of spreads, but the point of these graphics is not to prescribe a single option, but just to kind of highlight the flexibility that the deployment model has. So that's the location and the application perspective. I think at this point we were going to break for another poll question. you could
Yes,
fire
we
that up.
are, and I just, yep,
See,
I
what
did.
does your ops team monitor? So let me define ops team here for a moment for everybody filling out the survey. When we speak about your ops team, we refer to actually your team itself, not necessarily the ops team in its greatest sense in your company. So the team you work on, are you also monitoring internal applications, or are you just looking at external applications today?
And John, as the presenter, I'm not seeing the poll, so.
I do see the poll.
So if
So
you
the
could.
choices are external applications only, right? That's your sole focus. Or maybe your team's focus actually is internal applications, or both. You're doing both today, and we have many customers doing that.
Yep.
So we have the location focus slide up now. Yeah, it looks like the questions are, the answers are coming into our survey. Why don't we give it like another 15 seconds?
Sure. Absolutely. No rush. So we're just for the folks on the webinar. We're having a snowstorm here in the Boston area, so we're working from home today. So we're not in the comfort of our studio in our Somerville office. So I usually am better taken care of by folks. Have more screens to look at. So I'm used to seeing these questions live.
All right. Looks like we got a good coverage for the poll questions. Thank you, everyone, for answering the questions.
So let's keep on rolling. So there's one other aspect to location that I wanted to focus on before we go away, and that is we're seeing a lot of our customers are thinking about deploying, planning to deploy parts of their infrastructure to the cloud. I think it's a real trend. It's got some legs in it. I think it's gonna continue for some time now, kind of like mobile. So what happens if your application is in a private cloud? What do we do there? So as we mentioned earlier, we have a Hyper-V and an AMI instance of the private node server, and all you need to do is deploy that server into your private cloud, and you're able to monitor anything in that cloud or anything that cloud has access to. You might have a broader infrastructure that you're interconnecting this cloud with other pieces. Anything that you want to monitor from that cloud, you can simply by deploying either the the Hyper-V into Azure or the AMI into AWS. So the cloud is really not an obstacle to internal monitoring at this point. We're kind of agnostic at this point to whether it's an on-prem data center or the cloud. We can do either one. So that is the broad overview of what we can do with internal monitoring. I have a quick recap just to kind of reinforce what we talked about. The private node server itself has the same monitoring capabilities as the external network. We can do advanced API and web monitoring with SoapUI, Chrome, Firefox, and Selenium. It has the same alerting engine. It alerts just as fast as the public locations do. And we have the multiple hypervisor support. So we can pretty much get this server anywhere where it might be needed. And we're compatible with the most popular hypervisor options. From an application perspective, again, the key points here are the ability to monitor applications that aren't available via public monitoring. They let you use the same tool for both of your internal and your external monitoring going forward. There's a lot of efficiencies gained with that. The ability to monitor pre-production applications and look at them for performance and correctness from version to version is something that we're starting to see more people do. It's something that I think is an area where synthetic monitoring can add a lot of value and typically hasn't been applied as often on the pre-production environments. And I think this internal monitoring will help with that. Obviously, some customers will have all their environments internet-facing, in which case you don't necessarily need internal monitoring to do it. But I think it's more of a internal-only thing still for a lot of our customers. Monitoring the monitors, I think there was a question I saw about that. How do you monitor the monitoring app? I'm not sure if that's exactly what the question was in the chat, but when I say monitor the monitors, what I'm kind of talking about here is that the monitor itself will continue to work from application version to application version, so that you know when the app gets to prod, the monitoring is still going to work. And then finally, the ability to monitor and baseline, all your application environments is going to give you a lot more insight into what to expect as you roll versions of your application through the lifecycle. And then on the location side, the key things that you can do, monitor multiple locations to ensure that everything's working and it's working consistently, or at least as expected, from one location to the other. The ability to compare internal and external is also something a lot of our customers are doing. It's really opens the door to monitor both your own applications as well as vendor and third parties as well. And then finally, you have the ability to monitor your private clouds through AWS and Azure. And I think, MK, I missed one poll question a couple of slides earlier, which was the last one.
I believe so. Do you want me to launch it? Just
yeah, we're still
so we can
about
take a quick survey?
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, here is the third and final poll question that we have for our audience today.
And this one had to do with whether or not your pre-production environments were internet-facing or not, if I recall. John, I would say most of the pre-production monitoring that we see now is on the internal side, at least that I've observed and the folks I've talked to. What's your take on that?
Well, what I'm finding a lot of companies with both, where some of their environments are external-facing, some have URLs where others don't, and it's just about how they publish them. But I'm definitely seeing the whole internet infrastructure moving to more external-facing and not just 100% internal-facing, which would probably be the majority of the time if you go back 5-6 years ago.
And I think, as with a lot of these things, the bigger companies with lots of legacy elements, we're going to take longer to get there if they even choose to do so. And some of the smaller guys are all cloud right from the start, right? So.
Right, the e-retailers, generally that's where I see the test sites. Yep, they share with us the test sites, and the brokerage firms, the banks, for the most part, it's internal facing. All right, so
awesome. It's interesting that you guys said that, because what our audience is telling us is 57% of them do internal only, 0% are external, and 43% do both.
That makes sense.
That is interesting.
External.
That means nobody is fully kind of out there in the cloud on the public side.
Someone wants to hold their cards somewhere, right?
Yep. So that, I would. That's a pretty reasonable spread. That I might have maybe thought there would be one or a handful of folks who might have been all external, but otherwise I think that makes sense. Cool. All right, so that is the presentation portion. Now what we're going to do is I'm going to show you what the console looks like for the actual private node, and then we're going to switch it over to John, who's going to show you how that kind of interrelates with the rest of AlertSite. So what we're looking at now is the web console of a private node server that we have running in our Somerville office, running on Hyper-V. A couple of things to note. This UI is primarily used for initial setup and configuration, and then generally for troubleshooting. And oftentimes that troubleshooting is related to network setup and configuration. But oftentimes, once these things are turned on and running, you don't spend much time at all in this console. Most of what you would do would be managing the monitors via the AlertSite console that you use today. So this is the control panel. It's giving a quick sense of the server itself, the version, some uptime information. It's going to give you info on the monitors that have run, when the last runtime was, when the last time the server connected to AlertSite sent results, when was the last time it got configuration data from AlertSite and updated the monitors running on the server, when was the last alert that fired off. You can get a quick view of the monitors themselves and what their status is through this very simple tabular view. Again, this is primarily just to help troubleshoot, make sure that everything's running that you think it should be running. The real result information that's of use is really going into the AlertSite console and will surface there. We also give you a good snapshot of the configuration itself. What is the network proxy settings, what kind of name servers, if there's a mail relay set up. All those things will be called out and shown on this screen. You can modify network and proxy and email settings. You can set up static and virtual IPs. It's pretty flexible from that perspective. The diagnostic page lets you do a little bit more to figure out how is this server living in your environment. From a test perspective, you can hit a bunch of endpoints and figure out what's working, what's not, what am I able to connect to, what can't I. This is sort of the first step in diagnosing any problems that you're having. Make sure the server is actually allowed to get to where it needs to on the network. That's the first step. Once that's done, generally at that point, monitors just start running and it just really works like another location. You can also set up, you can send test notifications as well to make sure that the outbound email is working properly and is getting out. A lot of times we see that that's initially blocked, and so you either have to run it through a mail server or make sure those proper ports and protocols are allowed from the server. So that's it for this interface. I think at this point we'll turn it over to John.
Sure.
And he's going to show a little bit more in the AlertSite console.
I will take control, and let me just change the screen over. All right, we should be looking at the AlertSite console right now.
Yep.
So I thought it'd be good to transition from where Dennis was within the console and go to where that connects to in AlertSite itself. So you spun up the inside appliance. You still need to have it talk back to AlertSite, the SaaS platform, and you do that by going up here, Account. This is where you're going to configure your inside appliances. I already have some configured. This is where you're going to give it a name, right? You're going to see if it's running or not, which version it's on. You'll know if you've successfully registered the inside appliance by the version number showing up right here. If it doesn't show up, it's never successfully communicated with AlertSite, and even there's no monitoring taking place. So that's the first thing you want to see, and then you want to see the monitoring results coming back here, and of course they'll populate the dashboard, which we'll take a look at. What about editing one of these? So let's go into Campus Alpharetta, change its name. This is the location ID you're going to use and populate in the inside appliance and that other console screen that ties it back to AlertSite. If you ever move from one Insight to another, where you want to spin up one on Hyper-V coming from VMware, you'll reset this number right here, and that would allow you to reuse that monitoring node, and then all the monitors that are running on the other node will then be picked up and put down on the other monitoring location. So if you have 75 monitors running on one VMware and you move to Hyper-V, by resetting the number right here, grabbing the location ID, they'll just go up and back down again and arrive relatively quickly with the new location you spun up. But how does this information get presented within the console itself? I've actually set up a couple of filters. I'm in my testing environment right here. I basically said these two monitors are being tested, right? That's that environment. But let's move from testing. Let's move to prod. So this monitor right here, Tale of Two Cold Cities, I mean, it's snowing outside, looks cold, is running from the outside and inside at the same time. You can see the results coming back by clicking down the tile, go into compare mode. Then we have a map icon right here. And then I'm going to show you all the locations that we're running this monitor from. Look at that. Now we're running from the outside, from Toronto, one of our cities across the world, but we have that campus Alpharetta, and then someone took a long journey and put it somewhere in Middle Earth. Right? I'm not sure if this guy's actually going to pay for it or not, but it just shows you could run a monitor on multiple inside appliances as well as the external network as well, if you so choose. But how do you take a monitor and make it run from one of these locations? Let's do that. The pencil icon. You'll see this icon throughout the interface. You'll see it at the dashboard level. You'll see it at the compare mode. The pencil icon gets you to the configuration panel. So the traditional configuration settings like frequency is here, but we're here to talk about external locations and internal locations. How do you get it on the internal location? You go to Locations, and as long as you're in the All category, the default, if you scroll all the way to the bottom, any private node or Insight, one and the same that you've deployed, will be listed here. And if you want to run that monitor from the floating oil platform, you just select it. It's already selected, and then it'll start to run within a few minutes, collecting that data from the floating oil platform. Now that floating oil platform, incidentally, is on the 4th floor of our office in Somerville. It's not really there, but that's the power you have when you have the ability to name these private nodes. Same console, same interface. Though we do have some customers that they don't want to commingle their monitors in the same dashboard or even the same account. Some customers have chosen to have a separate account for internal, another account for external. And we support sub-accounts. And you can see here, I have different sub-accounts. So you can call these sub-accounts Campus, Alpharetta, Campus, Austin, whatever you want to do, and then those monitors will live in the sub-account instead. And then you could vertically go down to that sub-account and look at those monitors and grant access to those sub-accounts to certain users that may not want to see monitors from other accounts. So that's our story for internal monitoring. If there are any questions, pop them in the questionnaire section of GoToMeeting. Dennis, anything else?
No, I was going to go back to this question, how do you monitor the monitoring app?
I was thinking about that myself.
And I don't, without knowing the intent, it's a little tricky, right? But I think I kind of looked at this one before I finished up. I think I covered what at least I tried to clarify what I was trying to say, which was that you're monitoring the effectiveness of your future monitoring, if you will, by monitoring those pre-production versions of the application. So you're ensuring that the monitor will still function to determine performance and functional correctness of that journey that it was set up to do. I don't think that's what the question was trying to get to with calling it the monitoring app, though.
Right. So if we take the question literally of how do you monitor the monitoring application, how do you monitor AlertSite for availability? Right? How do you monitor that Insight appliance? Maybe you could speak to the server agent and its role and purpose.
Oh, that's a good point. That may be what they mean. So we have something. We have a server agent that can be installed and registered to each of these private node servers, and that's going to provide information on whether or not that private node server is connecting to the AlertSite platform. It's also going to provide some information about some of the system resources that are used. So it is a way to monitor, in this case, the monitoring server. So you know it's connected, you know that data is flowing, and you also can get some insights into how well the server itself is performing. And from a standpoint of monitoring AlertSite itself, that's something I do as the product owner with our ops team. Is we use AlertSite extensively to monitor the console and API endpoints and make sure that functionality is working. But I'm not sure that's where they were going with that question. So if you have any clarifying questions, you want to pop them into the question box, please feel free. And anyone else, if they have questions, we're happy to take them.
Right, and the thing is, when we monitor our monitoring application with our own tool, like how does that work in practice, do you think? Well, it works because the monitoring location, whether it's the private node or the external location, is independent of the SaaS platform. And given the notifications come from the location, even if the SaaS platform had a problem where you can't log in for a certain reason, things happen, that wouldn't stop the notification being sent from the monitoring node, because the monitoring node does not need to communicate back to the SaaS platform to notify someone that target application is down or web service.
That is a good point, John. I take that for granted since I happen to live in that world. But yes, it is a situation where we can monitor ourselves without sort of a conflict of interest, because it is two independent parts of our platform. Now we monitor, just as an aside, we are monitoring the health of our locations in a different way. We don't use AlertSite in that way. We look more at the data that's flowing to determine if we're in a healthy state for a given location. So we do look at that part of the platform differently. We got a thumbs up that we answered the question, so that's good, on the Monitor app, so that's awesome. And we've got a few more minutes, so if anyone else has anything they want to ask, this is the time.
And even though we're speaking primarily about web and web services, there is another type of monitor that you could monitor, a service that you can monitor. We support TCP connections and pings as well from the Insight Appliance.
All right. Well, I don't think we need any more questions at this point, unless we have someone typing a really long one.
Well, at this point, we could hand it back to MK. I think we've had some fantastic participation from the team with the surveys and the questions. And I look forward to speaking with you all individually at a later date, whether you're a customer or a future customer.
Oh, actually, one other thing, John, just to note, it is anybody who's a customer can spin up a trial of one of these private node servers, very easily. So please, if you're interested at all, I strongly suggest firing one up and seeing how it works for you.
Right. So if there's interest, reach out to your sales rep, a customer success rep. They'll put a plan in your account to allow free trialing of the solution within your production account, or if you want, you could have it in another account, whatever works for you.
Awesome. Well, thank you, John. Thank you, Dennis. And thank you, everyone, for attending this afternoon's session. As we mentioned earlier, the webinar has been recorded, and we will be getting a recording out to you hopefully by early next week. Again, as John mentioned, if you have any questions, feel free to contact your sales rep, your customer success rep, or feel free to reach out to one of us as well, and we'd be happy to help you. Thank you all, and I hope you have a great afternoon.